Hello. Welcome to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate, and welcome to our full-scale replica chamber of the United States Senate. It's pretty cool to be in here. Spent many hours sitting back there. So we are thrilled to have you all here today and excited to be welcoming the hosts of Pod Save America, as well as our own Senator from Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren. A special thanks to all of the friends, the 1787 Society members, and the partners who are with us this afternoon. Your support of the Institute makes programs like today's event possible. Dr. Grant, thank you for inviting me to open up today's conversation. On behalf of the board of this institute, we're excited to have your leadership at this very important time. Senator Kennedy believed in preserving our vibrant democracy by creating a place where every citizen could learn about the important role of the Senate in protecting that democracy. In just 3 years since we opened our doors, 60,000 students have been on this floor participating in our Senate immersion program. Essentially, they were senators for a day, listening to colleagues, working through issues, debating their causes, and, something we don't see very much anymore, forging compromise. They were shown how to move the country forward. And at a time when it's easy to feel that we're more divided than ever, these experiences and conversations remind us of the strength of our democracy and the importance of young people in it. However, the Institute isn't the only driving force behind the wave of civic engagement that's washed over our country. Despite not being able to host every podcast in a full-scale replica of the Senate chamber, Pod Save America has made their mark on today's pop culture and our politics. From defending the affordable health care from Republican attacks, or holding Democratic senators accountable and protecting DACA, they filled an essential gap, making politics incredibly accessible, accountable, and more importantly, hilarious. They've built an extremely successful company, Crooked Media, to inform, entertain, and inspire action and activism in a time when we desperately need both to defend our democracy. Pod Save America averages more than 1.5 million listeners an episode, and I'm sure many are in this room. Now, all of the Pod Save America hosts have an extensive resume in politics, running through many campaigns and plenty of time in the White House. Jon Favreau began writing for President Obama in 2005 during Obama's first term as U.S. Senator. He went on to be the president's speechwriter and has had a hand in crafting nearly every major speech the president has delivered over the last, I was trying to count this up, 13 years, basically. Jon Lovett started his political career as a speechwriter to Hillary Clinton in her 2008 presidential campaign and ended up writing speeches for President Obama at the White House. He was, among many other things, he was our comedy guy, and still is. And Tommy Vietor started with President Obama during then State Senator Obama's first run for the United States Senate in 2004. He was one of President Obama, then State Senator Obama's first staff members. Of course, he went on to work for President Obama in 2008, helping us win Iowa, and at the White House as a spokesperson on national security issues. We have lots of questions today on national security issues. But before their heads get too big, I think it's good to remind everyone that the pod guys weren't always pop culture icons. You see, everyone in politics has a story of where they started, and it usually involves doing the grunt jobs that nobody else wants to do. Am I right? I've known Favs for 15 years, since his beginning days on John Kerry's 2004 presidential campaign, pulling the overnight clips and writing talking points. Now he has groupies. I've also known Tommy for about that long as well, when he drove the press van across Illinois during the then State Senator Obama's first Senate run. Favs, Vietor, Lovett, and I have been in the trenches together through multiple campaigns in the White House to fight for a better life for those who couldn't fight for themselves. See, they didn't get into politics for the fans, though I'm sure they're nice to have, I wouldn't know. They did it because they shared Ted Kennedy's belief that together we can do good for each other, look out for the less fortunate, and fight for fairness and equality for everyone. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the It Boys of politics and podcasts, Jon Favreau, Tommy Vietor, and Jon Lovett.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was very nice.
Let's ruin it. I cannot believe that we are sitting in a replica of the Senate chamber. I think it's very cool. I could see filibustering in here. It's good.
This is so cool to be in the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. I've wanted to come here since it opened a couple years ago. It's incredible. Thank you so much for having us. We are going to bring out Senator Warren soon, so we will not talk for very long, but we thought we'd talk a little bit about why we started Crooked Media, which has very much to do with the mission of this institution. And before that, how we all got into politics and how we all are connected to the Senate. Tommy, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you all for having us here. I personally, I would not be here. I wouldn't have this job. I wouldn't have worked at the White House without Senator Kennedy. I was a college kid. I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. And I asked my cousin, Wendy Button, who's here, who's working for Mayor Menino, mayor of Boston at the time, what the hell I should do. And she said, you should talk to a guy I know who worked for Senator Kennedy. And that led me to getting an internship in Washington, D.C., and delivering mail to that replica office down the hall 3 times a day. And just sitting with brilliant people and learning by osmosis about politics and what Senator Kennedy was fighting for and what he stood for, and becoming inspired by him, and watching him go to the Senate floor day after day after day and just scream into a lectern about really big issues that mattered. And you know, another thing I've been lucky enough to do since I left the White House is spend some time working with students and teaching them, and a lot of them ask me, what do I do today to set myself up to work in the White House or run for Congress? Like, how do I prepare for this? And the answer is you can't. And don't worry about it, because for me, the other little twist in my life, without which I wouldn't be here, was there was a job in Ted Kennedy's real office, not the replica, to be one of the front desk guys. And after 4 months interning, I thought I was a shoo-in, and I applied, and I waited, and someone else got it. And because I didn't get that job, I left Washington, and I went and worked on a campaign. And it sent me down a path that led me to the Obama 2004 campaign, and then all that came after. So don't sweat it. It's going to be all right. Just work really hard. And if you have to go get the clips or deliver the mail 4 times a day, shut up and do it. It'll work out all right. So thank you guys for having us here. We're really excited.
My career has been a glide path of uninterrupted success. And from it, you can draw very few lessons. Humility. No, so...
Maybe my plant would be here somewhere. Thank you, sir.
Is that your dad?
Honestly, my only thought is that the only problem with us being here is that it's not the real Senate chamber. Think about it.
Don't think that hard.
Think about it. No, so I didn't know what I was going to do. I was doing open mics at stand-up clubs in New York. I was applying to law school, mostly because even though it's a time-intensive process, applying to law school takes less time than explaining to your parents why you're not applying to law school. I don't know, a couple essays. It's just easy comparatively. So I was doing that and temping as a paralegal, and I ended up interning one floor down, I believe, from where Jon was working for John Kerry, and I was interning for the communications team, the regional communications team, and I was getting coffee and doing clips. And
We were all doing clips, huh?
a lot of clips.
People now are like, what are clips?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were actually, it was sending around news stories before the internet.
Right. I would
what it was.
basically go and collect like paper. I was collecting clips from like.
I would
North
cut
Ca-
things out of the Globe
Yeah.
and the Herald, paste them on pieces of paper,
Yeah.
and fax them to the
Xerox
Boston
them.
office and Kerry's office. That was something that happened.
I was doing that. There was also a series of hurricanes that year during the 2004 campaign, and I guess it kept getting passed down to write the hurricane statement from Senator John Kerry. It kept getting passed down and down and down because it was always the same. It was the senator expresses his support for the people of wherever that have been impacted by this most recent storm, and there were so many that they just kept getting passed. So I wrote those statements, and it led to
Punch them up a little bit.
no, very few jokes. Which is my fault, honestly.
Find a way.
But through that, I ended up getting a job working for Senator Jon Corzine of New Jersey, and that was where I sort of got my start. And it was where I learned. I was a press assistant, and then like a deputy press secretary. And basically, one of the things I did in that job was you would print out every release from the senator, every press release the senator would put out, and this is about every appropriation. Oh, we got our funding for the Esplanade outside of Trenton. The funding for the Esplanade has moved on out of the committee, and you print it out. And then I would go to the old press office and put it in every single slot of every single reporter. And then I would just do that every single day.
And they would do this.
And they would just go, yeah, it'd be like, they just should have cut out the middleman and had me throw out the paper into the garbage. And that was how I got my start. And then a few months later, Hillary Clinton was looking for a speechwriter. She had to tell a few jokes at a roast of Barbara Walters. And I ended up writing her a few jokes to roast Barbara Walters.
Do you remember any of them?
It was around Hurricane Katrina, and in hindsight, I see why that material didn't work.
You've been on the hurricane beat for a long time.
I know. I got a lot of hurricane material. There was stuff about what you would use to repair the Superdome. Let's not get into it. You asked. But that was how I got my start. And then I remember, when Corzine was leaving the Senate, coming into this chamber. It's cool.
Is that it? Is that
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Just ending with the Corzine thing there?
Motion to proceed.
Yield the floor?
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka, aye.
That is a very niche U.S. Senate joke.
Yeah.
And I liked it.
So I first arrived at the Senate because I went to the College of the Holy Cross for college out in Worcester. And Holy Cross has a DC internship program. And so I decided that I would apply for an internship in my home state senator's office, John Kerry. And so I came down to Washington. I had a notional interest in politics, but I wasn't sure. And then I ended up in John Kerry's press office in the Senate. And it was 2002, and so it was right around the time that he was deciding to run for president. And so I sat in an office with his communications director and his press secretary and who became his political director was
And
in
you
there a lot.
said, don't do it.
No, and I was captivated, and I loved the idea of politics, and I had an incredible internship. And then I went back to Holy Cross my senior year, and I sent David Wade, his communications director, an email once a month asking if I could get a job on the campaign, and he responded to like every fourth email. And then the night before I graduated Holy Cross, I still had no job, and so that was cool. And then finally Wade called me and said, you have 2 weeks to move down to DC, you're gonna be an assistant in the press office, you're gonna be doing press clips, as we all did, and all that kind of stuff. So I moved down to DC, and they sat me next to the campaign's speechwriter, Andre Cherney, and I decided that he had the coolest job in the world, and I wanted to be a speechwriter, and so I constantly bugged him about helping out with speeches. And then at some point, there was an opening to be a deputy speechwriter on the campaign, and so I immediately asked him if I could be deputy speechwriter, and he immediately said no. He said I didn't have the experience, so that sucked. And then, a few months later, there was sort of a big shakeup in the Kerry campaign. We were losing to Howard Dean at the time, and Stephanie Cutter became communications director, and I was Stephanie's assistant, and being Stephanie's assistant prepares you for anything in life, which is fantastic. And we're sitting around, and Andre said, I still haven't found that deputy speechwriter because no one will join this campaign right now because we're losing, and we don't have any money left to hire someone. And Stephanie looked at me and she goes, well, why can't Favs do it? He's a good writer. And Andre's like, really? And she's like, yeah, give him a chance. So I owe the fact that I became a speechwriter to Stephanie. And then we went on to lose that campaign.
But you know what was good about that whole period of time and like sort of coming up in politics when we did?
Being 20?
Yeah, that was good. A lot of folks, the last year and a half has been awful and jarring and scary, and watching Donald Trump somehow ascend to office is like the worst thing imaginable. But it's particularly jarring after 8 years of the Obamas and some of the best, one of the best families ever to live in that house, who are just truly good, decent people doing things for the right reasons. I think we all got used to having someone we could count on and believe in and trust. And when we started in politics, you had this horrible contested election in 2000. 2002, Democrats got their butts kicked in the Senate races. We were going to war, and it was a grinding, brutal time, and you learned a lot of lessons. One of them was, this is really important stuff.
Yeah.
And if you let people go into an election on election day and think, George Bush, Al Gore, kind of the same thing, I might not vote. I might vote for the Green Party. I don't know. I mean, catastrophic mistake. And I think we all need to have that moment in the back of our heads every time we go to the polls. In 2016, we weren't there. In 2018, we got to be there because this is really important. And so that's sort of, that feeling is part of why we started Crooked Media.
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, I mean, we were all involved in these early experiences, and we had some tough campaign losses. Obviously, 2004 was particularly crushing, and I thought after that I would leave politics. I was 22 years old. I was very cynical. I thought, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'll finally go to law school like my parents have been telling me. And then Obama wins, and I get a chance to work for him in the Senate. And that's where I meet Tommy, and then eventually he wins, and I hired Lovett, and just like to remind people of that. That's apropos of nothing.
I just think it's also a thing like, people make mistakes, and you come back from them.
But the one thing that the Obama years taught the three of us is that it wasn't really, and Obama used to say this all the time, it wasn't really about him. It was about this movement of people, and especially young people, who were interested in politics and believed they could make a difference, and believed that the power to change things and to shape this democracy is in our hands, even when things get dark, even when it seems impossible. And so fast forward to 2016. We're all retired from politics, we thought. Tommy and I had started a speechwriting, public relations consulting company. Lovett was screenwriting in Hollywood. Check out 1600 Pen, the DVD box set.
One perfect season. You can get a DVD. They print them one at a time. They are made to order. They are bespoke.
And the three of us and Dan Pfeiffer had the opportunity to do a podcast about politics with Bill Simmons. And so we started this podcast called Keeping It 1600, and we thought that it would be our hobby, our side job, and it would be our way as political nerds to stay somewhat involved in the 2016 race.
Until Hillary won.
Until Hillary won. And she did win, we thought, well, it would still be a hobby. We'd all have our projects in life, we'd all have our jobs, but it would be a hobby. And when she lost, obviously, you know, it was like one of those, for everyone, I'm sure, it's like one of those moments in your life. And when you're just thinking like, what am I doing? What can I do? How can I make a difference? And suddenly, like, everything I had learned from the Obama years, everything that he had taught us, sort of all came rushing back. And the three of us, I remember that night, on election night, after being stunned and sad and miserable, kind of turned to each other and said, you know, we have to do something.
I think we really sealed the deal and decided to make it a go the next morning when we were driving back to the Ringer to do another podcast, to just eat all of our words over the last 8 months. And Lovett's car ran out of gas on Wilshire?
I was on Sunset.
Sunset, sorry.
Who could think about gasoline at a time like this?
And so
The country's E-light was on.
And so, as we pushed and then abandoned the car.
It broke down in front of the CNN building on Sunset. And so there were all these giant TVs of Donald Trump
wins,
giving his election night speech, and we are pushing Jon Lovett's car down Sunset. And we're like, I think it's time to start Crooked Media.
Yeah.
This is it. And look, we wanted to start a media company. We've also been media critics from our times in politics. And our major critique was, you know, the news oftentimes makes you feel helpless. Every night you're turning on the news and you're seeing all this bad stuff's happening in the world, and then it's over, and it leaves you with this feeling of helplessness, like you can't do anything about it. And we thought, what if there's a media company where we could inform people about what's going on, we could entertain people as well, use a little comedy, but then at the end, let people know, here's what you can do to make a difference about what you just saw on the news. And that's how Crooked Media was born. So. You're welcome.
Thanks for letting us do it.
And now, we are very lucky that Senator Elizabeth Warren is in the building. Welcome your senator.
Senator, I just want to start by asking you, I think, what is ultimately a sensitive but important question. How far down the list of senators would you have to go before you'd swap out 3 for the 3 of us?
We could do that right off the top.
Just feeling like this chamber.
You know, yeah, we gotta have you there, you know?
That's an endorsement.
Start off with some self-congratulatory stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. This is fun. Did you bring Duncan?
We did
No, not this time.
I had it this morning. I was very excited.
John, in Los Angeles, John Postmates Dunkin' Donuts coffee and breakfast sandwiches to his home.
Yes.
On a regular basis.
Yes, it's a long-standing story. In fact, I you know me, I'm always watching the finance end of things, and I saw that when the announcement was made that John and Tommy were going to be here, that Dunkin's stock went up another 15%, that it...
We're staying at the W Hotel, and right across the street, there's a Dunkin' Donuts.
There's a Dunkin'.
And I woke up this morning, and my wife's like, should we get breakfast ordered? Should we go out to a nice restaurant? What's your favorite place in Boston? This is home for you. And I said, no, we're going right across the street.
Right, exactly. Exactly. You know, I think they actually amend the directions on your app here. You know, most apps are like you go down 5/8 of a mile. Here it's you go down 2 Dunkins. And then turn left, and then you go past a Dunkin' on your left, then at the Dunkin' on your right. You make another turn and then come around.
Next
there.
to the Packy.
It works. It works.
Senator, so the last time we had you on the pod, you talked with John and Tommy about the partial repeal of Wall Street reform that was being debated in Congress.
Yep.
You call it the Bank Lobbyist Act, which we like to. Let's call it.
Right.
So the president signed this repeal this week after 33 House Democrats and 17 Senate Democrats voted for it.
Yeah, we're really starting out with fun stuff, aren't we?
Well, I was gonna, why do you think your Democratic colleagues, all of whom supported Dodd-Frank,
Right.
that voted for this,
Right.
why do you think they voted the way they did? And I guess more importantly, where do we go from here? I saw that you tweeted, this isn't the end of this fight.
Right. Okay, so let me start with the fact that the overwhelming majority of Democrats voted against it, took a strong stand and said no. And just to remind everybody what we're talking about here with the Bank Lobbyist Act, and the reason we call it the Bank Lobbyist Act is it was driven by the bank lobbyists. They're the ones who made big money off this. They were hired by the giant financial institutions to push this. Now, for those who voted in favor of it on both sides, they said, hey, there was help in here for community banks. And you know, this is what's frustrating about Washington. Both sides were willing to offer some help to community banks. That was not the dispute. The community banks were held hostage so that the Republicans said, we're not moving this thing forward unless the help for the community banks is accompanied by help for the giant banks. And the help for the giant banks came in two different forms. One form is that we have about 40 giant banks in the country right now that are on a special watch list. That's just the way to think of it. So they get extra scrutiny. Every other bank gets the regular regulatory stuff, but those banks, you check them more often, you do stress tests. Why? Because when they screw up, they take down the whole economy. And they're the ones out there running a lot of fast plays. So the first thing this bill does is it takes 25 of the 40 biggest and just moves them off the watch list. So it treats a bank that is a $225 billion bank as if it were the tiny little community bank out in Enid, Oklahoma. Okay, and poses no more risk to the economy than a bank of that size. And by the way, just so everybody's clear on this about kind of what that means in terms of size, anyone in here remember Countrywide?
Yes.
Oh, Countrywide. Countrywide, that was the bank that was pushing out the lying, cheating mortgages that basically blew up this economy. At their height in 2005, 2006, they were pushing out 1 in every 5 mortgages in the entire country. And what was Countrywide's capitalization? About $225 billion. In other words, the next Countrywide will be treated like a tiny little community bank has been taken off the watch list. So that's one problem. The other is there were a few just small technical adjustments. Don't worry your pretty little heads about them. Tiny little adjustments that mean that the ones that are still called the too big to fail banks, so that we still leave them in that designation, can do things like reduce their capital standards so that if things go wrong again, you, the American taxpayer, can pick up the ticket on it. And keep in mind on this in terms of risk, because that's what this is all about with these big banks. In terms of risks, the Wall Street Journal editorialized against this bill, saying don't let those big banks take on more risk. It doesn't work out well for the rest of America when that happens. Bloomberg Business editorialized against it. Even the government agencies stepped in and said, not a good idea, and yet Congress rolled this one on forward. And if you'll let me, I want to do one more piece because this just drives me nuts. So it's bad enough the big banks are muscling this thing through. They're holding the community banks hostage. But as long as it's moving, what they do is they say, let's get in just a couple of more punches for hardworking families. First punch, lending discrimination. Lending discrimination is real in America. There's a new study that came out that showed 61 cities where they did the analysis and found out basically that African Americans, Latinos, have a harder time getting loans than whites who have the same credit scores, same credit histories. And when they do get those loans, they pay more. And think about the implications of that over time. Okay, 61 cities, new study. Now, how do you get a study like that? You get a study like that with something called HMDA data, okay? Acronym, welcome to Washington. But the point is, data that every bank has to report. Man, if you've got a lending discrimination problem, there are two approaches you could use. One is you could say, we need to attack lending discrimination head on. We need to call out the financial institutions where it's happening. We need to enforce the laws, the anti-discriminatory laws, right? That's one approach. The approach in this bill is to say 85% of banks no longer have to report data on lending discrimination. Think about that. So that's in this bill. And then one more, home mortgages. That's how the big banks blew up the economy last time. They did it one family at a time, selling them one lie and cheat and home mortgage that the people didn't understand, but boy, the bank was clear. They knew that you weren't going to be able to repay that thing, that you were going to have to refinance, and that meant more money. Or if you couldn't, they were going to get the house back and resell it again, which in an upmarket was money, 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 right? So when Dodd-Frank was passed, Congress said we're going to create, okay, everybody get ready to applaud. We're going to create this new consumer agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Yay! But just in case, we're also going to say there are certain things, no matter what else the CFPB gets tied up in, they must do on mortgages. There are going to be some new rules that have to come out, basically to say if these big banks want to cheat people in the future, they are not going to be able to do it through home mortgages. So some things about what's called steering and yield spread premiums, which is just kind of a way of doing kickbacks, and some tie-in arrangements on how they could make more money and cheat more people. So these rules get passed, and these rules apply, I just want everybody to follow me here, to regular bricks and sticks homes, mortgages on those kind of houses, the kind you'd expect. They apply to condos, sounds right to me. And they also apply to people who live in manufactured housing, trailers, double wides, people who are trying to buy their homes, that's their entry-level point. What this bill says is the rules are still going to apply to bricks and sticks. They're still going to apply to condos. But you know, those people who live in trailer parks, let them get cheated. It's not going to make a big difference. That's the kind of stuff that, when that happens, you just want to say, what kind of a government would let something like this happen to its own people? What kind of government would say, we're going to help out for the profitability of the giant financial institutions, or in this case, for the companies that make these manufactured homes, sell them, repo them, sell them, repo them, sell them, repo them, and make their money that way. We're going to let them we're going to move the needle over and let them trick people a little more, cheat people a little more, fool people a little more, so that the folks at the top can improve their bottom line, their profits. And here, if it weren't enough, at what moment in America does this happen? It happens at a moment when the banking industry is making record profits. And it's true for all of them. So the rich get richer and everybody else eats dirt. That's what that new law is all about.
Bad law.
Yeah, bad law.
Sort of to
Bad.
We're not fans. So just sort of to follow up on that a little bit, I mean, obviously there are big banks and financial institutions and their army of lobbyists making, pushing for laws that are clearly self-interested and going to hurt people. But I also think you have incredibly well-educated, well-meaning people making policies and making decisions based on, policy papers and sort of things they've learned. How do we ensure that more people in Washington who are working in the White House or Congress have actually experienced poverty and understand the implications of what they're doing on everyday folks, so that it's not just lobbyists and then think tanks sort of figuring out what happens?
So I'm gonna push this in a slightly different direction, and that is to talk about what I think is really going on in Washington. We got to name it for what it is: corruption. This is just corruption. And it's corruption in so many ways that pervade what happens in Washington. And look, the American people have tumbled to parts of it. We talk a lot about campaign finance reform on our side, about Citizens United. We need to get money out of politics. And yes. That would help a lot. It would help a lot. But it's not the only way that the influence of money is felt in Washington. It's not just the campaign contributions. And that really goes to your point. It's who Washington hears from every day. So folks go over and over, think about this. This has happened before. People say, I'm going to the polls to vote the bums out. And then they go to the polls and they vote, and government keeps working just the way it worked before. It just doesn't change. And so the cycle starts again, and they say, I'm going to the polls to vote the bums out. And it stays about the same, maybe gets a little worse. What's the reason for that? One of the reasons is because the people who are really running much of Washington aren't on the ballot. They're not there.
Michael Cohen?
Yeah. Right? So let's at least pick the pieces that are the most obvious. So I'm working right now. I'm working on a big piece of legislation. There's just an anti-corruption legislation, clean government. That's what I want to see. And let me offer 3 quick parts to it, just as a taste, right? The little these are the previews of coming attractions, but 3 quick parts to it in thinking about all the work that gets done through the agencies, through the administration, through the cabinet officials, right? All that work that gets done in Washington. So what could you do? Well, I can think of 3 things. The first one is you could say nobody gets to bribe people on their way in. So this business, for example, of giant financial institutions that will pay millions of dollars to their own employees to go take a leave of absence to work in government, so to regulate the very institution they are leaving. Anyone see anything wrong with that, right? So the first one is, no, if you want to serve in government, that's great, but you don't get a parting gift from your company that suggests that maybe while you're in Washington, you're going to be doing a lot of work to help out your former and future employer. So that would be one. A second one would be, when you go to work in the government, you got to get rid of your assets that create no more conflicts of interest. You got to divest. That's it. Divest and disclose. And if you're not willing to divest and disclose, then don't take the job. We'll get someone else. And the third part is when you leave government, especially one of those really fancy jobs in government, you shouldn't get to trade on the list of friends you made while you were in government, because I think that changes how people think about it. So here's one. How about if we put a lifetime ban on lobbying, just to start, on every president, person who serves in Congress, agency head, and cabinet secretary. To say you want a fancy position like that, fine, but you're signing on the dotted line that you're not going to turn around and become a lobbyist afterwards. It might help.
Senator,
Like it.
so, you know, this bill that seems to put more power in the hands of big banks has just passed through Congress. The Supreme Court just ruled against workers who have arbitration clauses in their contracts. There is this debate about how Trump happened. It's a long one. But I think there's
Or a short one.
sure. But I think there's these competing theories. One said, oh, our norms, our values, they've been undermined. But on the other hand, that what we're seeing is entrenched corporate power, using that power to consolidate its authority in Congress, in the agencies, in the courts. 17 Democrats voted for something that you think is an emblem of the power of these banks.
Yep.
You're saying that we have elections where people vote for change and they don't get it.
Yep.
Are Democrats right now representing the kind of change we need, that if we were to win in 2018, people would feel as though their votes were validated?
All right, that is a really good question. So I take this question really seriously. In fact, it's a big part of what I talk about, is we got to win in 2018, and we actually have to watch this in pieces. We win in 2018, we still don't have control to get everything through that we need to. So let me just play it on out. We win in 2018, and that puts us in a much stronger position to be able to, for example, stop some of the worst nominees that the Trump administration is pushing through, particularly lifetime judicial nominees. That's a powerfully important thing if we have control of the Senate. It gives us a chance to put a brake on something like a tax bill that gives away $1.5 trillion to giant corporations and billionaires, and puts us in a position to put a brake on where at least the House says it, and actually the Senate, Republicans say they want to go next, and that is to cut Medicare, to cut Medicaid, to bring the budget closer back to balance. So it permits us to do that. If we are in a position in 2020 to, please God hear me, have Democrats in the House, in control of the Senate and in the White House, then it's not just, that's the end goal. No, that's only the beginning. At that moment, we have got to deliver real change for the American people. That has to be our job. We can't just say, okay, we're here now. It cannot be that our goal is to go forward saying, we're not as bad as those guys. We do not suck as bad as the other side. We actually have to do something positive at that point.
So one follow-up on that. One of the many, many things that keeps me up at night. If the Democrats take the Senate, if we should be so fortunate in 2018, and we get to the place where there is a Supreme Court vacancy.
Yes.
If it's Ginsburg, if it's Kennedy, if it's someone on the court. Democrats at that point have the power to make sure we don't get another Gorsuch. Mm-hmm. But to use that power, it may look like what Mitch McConnell did in holding that seat open for Gorsuch and making sure that Garland didn't get in. Do you think the Democrats, if faced with a nominee like Gorsuch, when they're in control in the Senate, will hold the seat open or will block a nominee like that?
So let me reframe this just slightly. Mm-hmm. In thinking about it this way, this is how I think about it. We had the filibuster for a very long time, but it was very rarely used. And the reason was because knowing that there was a filibuster meant you had to kind of keep those folks within a certain range. Mm-hmm. I get it. The people that George W. Bush would put in wouldn't be exactly the same as the people that Barack Obama would put in, but they'd be along the same road, right? They'd be somewhere in that close in. Merrick Garland. Look, Merrick Garland is the kind of man who could have been nominated by a Republican or a Democrat. And decades and decades and decades in our past would have been that kind of guy. And what's changed, first with the loss of the filibuster, and can we also talk blue slips, or will that just make us sound so wonky that everybody else said, right? It'll cause people to dial out. Not this crowd, not where we're sitting, right? Okay.
Anyway, there's some Senate minutia. Mm-hmm. It's very frustrating. It was turned against us.
Yeah, there you go. But the bottom line is all of that was there but rarely used because it was a way to get us to come together and not politicize the judiciary, not get people who'd said things that just are disqualifying on its face, and not get people who come in with strong ideological bents or already beholden to someone. You know, the big problem, you just mentioned actually in the Supreme Court, you specifically went to the most recent decision that just said, sure, employers can require you to sign an arbitration clause. And to some folks, that may sound like, okay, so what's the big deal? Arbitration sounds cheaper than going to court. Huh, yeah, except who picks the arbitrator? And if you get cheated, if you get harassed, if you get discriminated against, and you're told, go to our bought and paid for arbitrator, that's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem because it takes legal rights that you are entitled to and says you no longer have redress in an American court. Yes, you're an American citizen. Yes, your rights were violated. But sorry, way back at the beginning of this employment relationship, before you knew who that guy was that you were working for or what this company was going to do, you signed, and somewhere there in paragraph 39 in technical legalese, you just said, I don't care what you do to me. I'm never going to have the right to take you to court. And I'm not going to have the right to join with other people who were discriminated against, who were harassed, and take you in a class action lawsuit. That's pretty stunning. So which Supreme Court justice in a 5-4 opinion just delivered that gift to corporate America? Answer, Neil Gorsuch. Neil Gorsuch. But here's the point.
But would you
Yeah.
hold the seat?
Well, so... So the question is who you put up. Because that's how I see it. I don't see it as starting out saying, I don't care who you put up, I'm holding the seat. That was what Mitch McConnell did. Right. He said, you send me anybody. If it comes from Barack Obama, there's a 2-letter answer, and the answer's no. I think that's wrong. But I do think you send a Neil Gorsuch to us, and the answer is no. We do hearings, we do it substantively, the answer would be no.
Senator, we have to let you go, but I just have one last question because okay. I read something you said recently, and I frankly found it a little shocking, and I need to use this opportunity to ask, which is that you said that you're a big fan of the show Ballers.
Oh, yes.
Now, we're HBO guys, but Game of Thrones, John Oliver, Barry's really good, but... Is it The Rock? Is it the whole thing? Like, why Ballers?
It is The Rock.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much for being here.
Senator Elizabeth Warren.
All right, Ballers.
She's stuck between a rock and a bad show. Rock and a hard
Nope.
show.
Nope.
Place.
Nope.
Whatever, who cares?
We have time for some questions, which we would love to answer. And where am I looking? Right there. Great.
Oh my God! Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
All right, friend of the pod.
Yes.
So we were also there last night. You guys rocked as usual. Thank you. Your mom agrees.
Thanks, Mom.
When you were interviewing Deval Patrick, he talked a lot about insider and outsider politics, which also happens to be very strong in Massachusetts. So I am running for state senate in Massachusetts.
Congrats.
Thank you. I think that we have some voters up here in the district. But I'm running against an incumbent of the same party. So I'm an outsider running against an insider. Thank you. So during the 2008 campaigns, I'd love to hear what advice you were given when you were running that campaign for your outsider. And then, of course, Mr. Lovett, I'd love to hear what scared you the most on the other campaign when they did things against.
Well-known insider, Jon Lovett.
Thank you.
I'm an establishment guy. I like wearing a suit. I like the status quo. I like the banks. I like the whole thing.
I think for a long time, the party organization, the DCCC, the DSCC, they were looking around to say who can write him or herself, usually him, a big check to deal with the fundraising advantage and just sort of get that part out of the way. And then I think now you're seeing these candidates out of Georgia, out of Kentucky, that came to the table with no money, but unbelievable, inspiring stories, like the first Marine woman to ever fly F-18s. And Amy McGrath, they cut an ad that nearly bankrupted the campaign, and weeks later, they had raised millions of dollars off it, and they told inspiring stories. So I think that was sort of the lesson of Obama was an outsider that has a story to tell that is inspiring and rooted in who you are as a person and how you came up and the things you believe in, the values like of who you are, can overcome endorsements, newspapers, money, but people just have to get out there and let rip. And Obama was getting his butt kicked for a long time.
Yeah.
We would joke about it.
And look, and when that was the case, it was the spring and summer of 2007. I think there was a moment where Obama thought that in order to compete against Hillary Clinton, he had to talk about how he had experience too, and talk about all of his legislative accomplishments in the Illinois State Senate. And there was a thought in the campaign that maybe we need to compete against her on experience because that's what she has. And then I think we realized by the fall, and him especially, that we didn't want to play on that field, that why he was running was to bring change, and to bring change to an establishment that wasn't working for people. So as opposed to having some argument with her over who has the more experience, what he said in his announcement speech was, there's plenty of experience in Washington, and I haven't been there long, but I've been there long enough to know that Washington needs to change. And once we settled on that message, that the fact that it was a change campaign, and he could run on that better than she could. And hammering that as opposed to playing on the experience and worrying about all the attacks on the experience, that actually helped him out at the end. And Lovett, what did you think?
Yeah, I'll just, I was on the other side. It was worse.
You got to learn from Mark Penn. Do you have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, well, look, here's what I'll say. Who cares? Let's get into it. So the 2008 Hillary Clinton campaign was a mess. It was a mess because it turns out that they were running against Barack Obama, which is hard to do. I would say that there were two things that were incredibly frustrating. I think one was self-inflicted and one was a larger force. The self-inflicted part was all the kind of running through different messages. She had a message person who I think fundamentally believed that because he couldn't see Barack Obama as a president, other people wouldn't either. And so everything was about hammering that home. How can this Barack Obama guy possibly win? How could anyone see him as a president? I don't. And so I remember that it was, one of the slogans was strength plus experience equals change, which is a very silly math equation because it means that change divided by strength plus experience equals 1. So make sense of that.
This is like every day in our office, we get a math lesson like this.
What about the bus? You're
One minus-
the bus. Don't forget that.
1 minus strength equals change minus experience, I believe. Anyway, but then finally they landed on a slogan which was
problems.
big problems, real solutions, time to pick a president. What kind of message guru seizure did that come out of? It's nonsense. Of course it's time to pick a president. We get it. It's a presidential election. If you're at the level of explaining to people what the election is for, Meanwhile, they've got a big sign and it says change on it. That
was
seems
easier.
better. So that was frustrating. I would say, though, a legitimate gripe I had at the time was that even as Barack Obama was running on a mantle of change and did represent change, a change in philosophy, a change in the kind of politics he would practice, something that is absolutely borne out in his presidency, on policy, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in 2008 had very, very few disagreements. They were very, like, the disagreements in their healthcare plan were minor. It was over a mandate that Hillary Clinton had and Barack Obama did it, something he ultimately adopted. Energy policy, education.
I mean, there was Iraq.
Well, but of course there was a huge foreign policy disagreement about her vote for Iraq, but by the time the election's begun, she's already done the thing of joining every other Democrat who voted for it and kind of apologizing. The Democratic Party had a consensus, an incredibly strong consensus. And the debate was never over that, which is, I think, why ultimately it was a very effective campaign for Barack Obama. But the critique that I had at the time was Barack Obama is campaigning against Washington politics. But for those of us who supported Hillary Clinton, we wanted to campaign against Republican politics. And I do think that that's something that came to be a lesson of the Obama years and something we see now, which is the Democratic Party is far from perfect. We just talked about it with Senator Warren. There's way too much entrenched corporate interest. There's way too much establishment thinking. All of that is true. But the crisis we have in this country is the crisis of Republican politics. And calling that for what it is, I think, is something I wanted to see more at the time from Barack Obama, that was something that frustrated me at the time.
Hi, my name's Peter. I'm from Brookline, and my question is basically that I feel like we've seen recently that a lot of Democrats are more willing to forego the things that make our party better than the Republicans, being that we're the moral party, essentially. And sort of playing into what you guys were asking Senator Warren in your last answer, do you think it's worth it to become more like Mitch McConnell if it means overcoming people like Mitch McConnell?
Good one.
Look, we have asked a couple of guests on this podcast the question that we asked Senator Warren about the Supreme Court, and I think she came closest, in my view, to nailing the answer, which is she's right that I don't think the Democrats need to necessarily start off the next Supreme Court fight saying, no, whatever Donald Trump gives us for a Supreme Court justice, we're just going to say no, and we're going to hold the seat open no matter what. I do think they should say, unless you give us someone who is, first of all, going to be pro-choice, going to be pro-worker, going to be, it's going to look like, basically we want someone who's going to look like a Merrick Garland. And if you don't give us that, we're not going to vote for the person. And we're going to hold the seat open. So I don't think you go right to the Mitch McConnell position on that, but I think effectively you say, this is what we believe, these are the values that we have, and you need to reflect these values or else we're going to say no to this. And so I do think we shouldn't lead with the fact that we're going to be as Mitch McConnell's going to be. But we should also be willing to fight tooth and nail for what we actually believe in and not worry so much about looking like we're Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, I guess I would say it's a little bit like we've been playing Monopoly against Mitch McConnell for a long time, and he's been the banker the whole time, and he's been taking money as he played. Just little bits here and there, just taking it, putting on his side. Now, we are in a knockdown, drag-out fight to become the banker. I don't think we need to steal from the bank, but we need to make sure he can't get his fingers near it. You know? I guess I just... It was a long journey for
Which
that one.
piece are we? Are we the top hat?
I guess I just mean that I think Democrats have been a little too enamored of the Washington notion of the way Washington works, which is very much about civility and conversation and much less about power. And I think we need to be more comfortable with the fact that what we're trying to do is take some power. And we can use it better, we can use it more effectively than they would, and we can keep an eye on them. But like voting, they have been using their power to make it harder for people to vote. We need to use our power to make it easier for people to vote, and we need to be unabashed about it. and go further than we have, and to be on the offense where they have been on the offense.
Yes. And that's an example of, look, as long as we are on the side of more democracy, more people voting, more people having opportunity, more people having rights, then we'll never be like Mitch McConnell, you know, and fighting for those things within a framework of rules and laws and institutions, which we have to abide by because that's what that's how a democracy functions.
But if the UK does want to hack the Republicans and help us win this time, maybe Denmark and Sweden, a couple other the good guys, get our version of Ocean's 11 of democracies, we'll think about it.
Up there? Yeah. Who's got a question? Oh, there we go.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here today. Huge fan of you individually. This question is for Lovett. We've talked about, as a group, as a podcast, that we can't annul the Trump presidency, that we're never going to be able to erase it. But if we could, and that one way to annul the Trump presidency was for you, Jon Lovett, to go back into regular obscurity and sacrifice your position as a media mogul, would you do it? Because Jon Lovett, I'm not sure I would.
Our staff just laughed the hardest at that question.
Yeah, Mukta's losing it over there.
So, that's a great question. Thank you. I guess I'd say, so let's say there's a button, we press it. Hillary,
This is easy.
Of course it's easy. Of course it's easy. Of course it's easy. Of course I'd do the right thing. I'd press the button. There isn't one. You know, I keep trying and I keep pressing the red button to undo it and go back to obscurity. Doesn't work.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you.
question. Thanks for
question.
listening.
Thanks for that journey.
Hi, my name is Casey Lenaden.
Hi.
I had a question. What do you think about the 28th Amendment that we are pushing right now to see if it can be passed in Washington, D.C. regarding freedom on elections, putting a cap on the fundings that, politicians that have so many people in their wallet, and compared to people who doesn't have a lot of funds in running for election. The 28th Amendment is trying to give freedom back to the people and to put a cap in having a total disclosure on who is giving you fundings when you're running for election, because those are the same people that will get more preference when they win the election. So what do you think about the 28th Amendment?
It's a great question. I have to check out the exact language of what that 20th Amendment says, but I think that long term, once we win, back the House in 2018, hopefully the Senate, and win the presidency in 2020, like reforming our campaign finance system is probably the most important thing we can do, period, for the long term health. For the long-term health of our democracy. Because the fact that the first thing, for a long time, the first thing you would do when you ran for president is you would go to Iowa or you'd go to New Hampshire and you'd start stomping for votes and meeting people and glad-handing and kissing babies. Now you go find one of the 50 billionaires in the country and you lock down your billionaire, and then that person funds a massive super PAC for you, or some, you go to a Koch brothers summit and you kiss the ring and get tens of billions. And Republicans are exponentially worse on these issues because most of them are doing it because they have businesses like the fossil fuel industry or other things they want deregulated, so they get a huge return on their investment. The Koch brothers can put up $100 million and get a $3 billion tax cut and feel pretty good about that ROI. Democrats, we have our own billionaires who can distort money in politics and distort issues, but I don't think it's not as bad in my personal opinion. Regardless, I think it is absolutely toxic. The Citizens United ruling is one of the most damaging things to ever come out of the Supreme Court in recent history, and we have to fix it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's of course almost impossible now to get laws through Congress, let alone constitutional amendments. And I was talking to someone for a pod who runs End Citizens United, and obviously their ultimate goal is a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, but they also have a long list of policies that they hope to pass that can curb the influence of money in politics that are short of passing a new constitutional amendment that we can do with a majority in the House and the Senate, which is what we can hope for, and of course a Democratic president in the short term until we build that larger majority to actually overturn the amendment. So
It's a great question.
yeah, thank you. Over there.
Is it on? Hi. Real quick, Tommy, I started listening to Jason Isbell because you kept mentioning him in Sonos
nice.
ads, so thanks for that.
No problem.
It's been great.
Let me know if you need any other recommendations. Just give me a call.
By the way, my friend Shane here has been referring to himself as the other human boat shoe for the last year, so
Shane, congrats.
Oh, look at you.
Are you a right or a left?
Micah?
it's very.
We'll talk
Very
about it.
boat shoe-like.
My question is for Lovett. I was at the show last night, which was great, really fun. During the Q&A period, you talked a little bit about what got you into politics and talking about how politics was kind of a haven in the years between when you realized you were gay and when you came out. I was really moved by that. I really identified a lot with that. I came out like 6 months or so after there was a marriage equality referendum in Maine, where I'm from. And I remember that being a very difficult line to walk into how to engage with that referendum without, wanting to be more open than I was comfortable being. And I was wondering, because, you're a little bit older and you kind of were, than me, I'm 23, don't worry.
So you're still learning how to be gay, it sounds like.
Yeah, it really sucks. It's not great. This is the greatest moment of my life. I was wondering if you could just talk about your experience when working for example, Hillary Clinton before she was in support of marriage equality, and what that was like, especially as someone who was a speechwriter and was very responsible for what was said about that.
Yeah, I remember one time, so we were working on that, and it was when no major Democrats, or at least the vast majority of major Democrats were not in favor of marriage equality, and it was when, I remember when being in favor of, it took a year. In 1 year, a Democrat saying, I'm in favor of civil unions was an applause line. A year later, it was a line that got booed. It was an incredibly fast thing. It was fascinating to watch. But I remember when, as part of that debate, Hillary Clinton was not going to come out in favor of marriage equality. And I was working on those speeches. And I actually would say, it would be wrong to say that I felt super conflicted about it. I actually think it's a sign of just how much things have changed, that I had internalized how okay that was, that I thought it was good. Look, this is the best we can do right now. And I think anyone who says, we should be honest about that, because I think part of getting to marriage equality was gay people realizing that they shouldn't accept anything else. And I don't think I did at that time, but I did stand up from my desk, and I just walked into Hillary Clinton's office because I was showing her a version of a totally unrelated speech, and I just said something and I was, maybe 23, 24, and I was more awkward than I am now. And I just said, and I just want you to know that I'm gay. And then she said, oh, Jonathan, I knew months ago. I think it was a lie. Then, years later, I was working in the White House with Jon and Tommy, and I snuck two gay people in and did a gay marriage ceremony in the Rose Garden before Barack Obama came out in favor of marriage equality. So that was cool. I think gay organizations took what they could get for a very long time, and I think we internalized that, and I think I internalized that throughout that fight. But that's it. That's all I want to say about that. Great question.
Hi, this is a question for Jon. Jon, I'm wondering how your initiative on Dem messaging is going. I'm one of many people, I hope, who sent you a love note.
Yeah,
The pictures you sent were so nice. Very tasteful.
It's going very well. It is. We will have the first episode. Oh, Lovett, there you go. Lovett just spilled Diet Coke all over the Senate floor. So that's something that happened.
Perfect metaphor for the Democratic Party.
No, so it is. It's coming out in July, about the second week of July, I think. We're gonna have the first couple episodes. But look, it's been a very rewarding experience. I talked to about 100 people that either work in the party, politicians, strategists, pollsters, and I think one of the, and then of course I did a couple focus groups. People like you called in. We had something like over 1,000 voicemails, which like the vast majority of them were people who were very positive and had very constructive solutions, and so that was very, hopeful. But I think the overall thing that I learned in the course of doing this podcast is that for all the arguments and debates that we have within the Democratic Party, there actually is a lot more that unites us and binds us together right now than you would think from the debates and the fights on Twitter. And look, part of that is due to the fact that there's a lot of, and we've talked about this a lot today, there's a lot of Democrats who, would either consider themselves establishment Democrats or who've been in politics for a long time and who have, proposed more technocratic, incremental solutions to a lot of our problems because, as Lovett was saying with the marriage equality debate, we thought that's all we could get. We thought that was the best we can do. And one thing that 8 years of Obama and now a Trump presidency, I think, especially the Trump presidency, has done to a lot of Democrats is make them realize that we have to be as big and bold as possible in both what we propose, what we say, what we believe. We have to be fearless. We can't be cautious in how we speak. And I found that whether the people I talked to worked for Hillary, whether they worked for Bernie, whether they were Obama people, whether they worked for none of the above, a lot of them believed that. And so there was a lot less acrimony than you might see when we actually have an interesting conversation with someone. So, hopefully everyone will like it, and it'll be out in a month or two.
I gotta say, we love every minute of what we get to do. We get to talk about things we care about for a living. We've hired the most amazing team you could possibly imagine, but it takes a lot of hours. And Jon, in addition to hosting the show twice a week, now goes home every night, interviews hundreds of people, writes VO, voiceover until 2 in the morning. So which is just a way of saying, if you guys don't subscribe and give this thing 5 stars, sight unseen,
Thank you, Tommy.
we'll be upset.
And this is our last question, I believe, because I'm getting a final question thing.
The person to your left was pointing at you every time it was time for a question. I know. And he did great. Like, what about this person? Have you thought about this person?
Well, my name is Kiara. I am 22 and I work for a 24-year-old state rep. So as young people, thank you. As young people who work in politics, what you do inspires me every single day. On that same note, I'm starting to get more serious about my career, and I want to know why you guys decided to stay on the staff level rather than running for office yourself.
I didn't decide that. I will say, I'll just be honest in saying, I think that I ended up in politics because I was angry and the opportunity came along. I cared about it, and in my mind, like I watched The West Wing when it came out. I was looking forward to it. I remember when watching the first episode, and to me, the idea of being like a presidential speechwriter was the coolest thing. And so that's all I ever, that's sort of what I aspired to, and I had the chance to do it because Jon made a mistake. And the, because he anonymized the draft, so he couldn't tell which one was mine to throw it out.
No, that's not true. I came down to 2 drafts that were anonymous. that I thought were the best 2 drafts, and one was Lovett. And then I met with the 2 people, and I met with Lovett, and he made me laugh my ass off. And I was like, and I interviewed someone who worked with him, and they're like, the one candidate's pretty solid. Lovett has real highs, but he can also be, a little bit to deal with. And I was like, sold. That's who I want. Never regretted it for a day.
I have to say, I've saw run for something, and I've looked at all this, and I've looked at this moment, and I've thought why wouldn't I be one of those people that runs for something? I don't know the answer. I think it's probably timidity. I also think as a person, constitutionally, I like taking risks. I understand where I'm in charge of the risk. And I think it's nerve-wracking to put your fate in the hands of other people in democracy. I think that is the scariest part about it. And it's the ultimate filter that keeps people from running for office unless they've worked up the courage and really, really want it. It's actually a cool and powerful part about why the system works. So I would be lying if I said that there was any real reason other than I think it's really hard. I think it's a really big decision, and I don't think I've ever been in a place where I was ready to make that big decision. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's incredible that you ran at 24. It's awesome that you're working in politics at 22. For me, the thing that I really loved about the Obama campaign and the Obama White House was the group of people. Obviously, there was something that made the really, really dark days okay and sometimes even kind of fun because you were with people that were dealing with the same thing and loved it and we're all fighting together. When Hillary was attacking Obama over Reverend Wright or Tony Rezko, we would just sit there we are going to get our butts kicked. This thing's over. But we found, motivation and gallows humor and got through it together. So I think whether you run, whether you're part of a team that's working for something, it can be a nonprofit, it can be the Foreign Service, it can be whatever you want it to be. I don't know that one is better than the other, but I want people to understand that Washington isn't totally broken. It's full of really great people who try hard in a tough system. You can make a difference. All politicians are not the same. There's some really great ones and some really god-awful ones. And if we can vote out the god-awful ones, that's a great thing too. So being a part of a campaign that does that is incredible.
And a pretty soft middle.
What's that?
A lot of okay ones right there in the center of that bell curve.
Right. You got a lot of you got Obamas, you got your Cruzes,
and then
you got your Evan Bayes. Straight down the middle. Anyway, that's it.
I would say that if I had to do it all over again, and I was in my early 20s, I might go down the path of running for office. I think where I am now is happier than I've ever been in a job since the early days of the Obama campaign. And it's also a job that I never in a million years thought would be my job. It's oh yeah, I'm a podcast host and I run a podcast company with my 2 best friends.
Yeah, it's also if you tell somebody that's heard of Pod Save America, it's cool. If they haven't heard of it,
my poor fiance Hannah. Every third friend, she's like, he works at a podcast. Yeah.
I
talk about politics.
I met Amy Adams at a very fancy party, and someone's like, he hosts a political podcast, and she wanted to turn and talk to somebody else, and my friend was like, no, it's pretty popular, and she's like, okay, cool, and I said, Amy, it's so popular, I'm at this party.
And now Amy Adams is a huge Pod Save America fan.
We love Amy Adams. Oh,
but look, no,
cut the Q&A.
It's live streaming.
No, but I'm happy with the choices I made, and I also think that right now, if any of us ran for office, look, we have decided to go from staffers where we were careful what we said and careful for our bosses to podcasters where we don't really care what we say at all. I know that the Republican National Committee tunes into Pod Save America because every once in a while they send out a sad little tweet about something we say, but I also know if any of us ran for office, there'd be a lot to work with. lot to work with on the Republican side. So we're pretty good where we are now. But I say that only because I always want to encourage other people, and especially young people, to not just work in politics, but to actually consider running for themselves. I've talked a lot with, since the campaign, with Amanda Littman, who had worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign, and she started Run for Something. And the stories that Amanda will tell you about the people who are running for the first time, if you're ever having a bad day, it's the most inspiring thing you'd ever hear. Because these people who have never been involved in politics before, or people who, and it's not just young people, it's people in the middle of their life, people later in life, who just think, this election has changed me in a fundamental way, and I'm gonna do something risky, and it's gonna be scary at first, but I'm gonna dive in. And she also says that some of them who lose, she's like, I don't worry about the candidates who lose, because after they lose, they tell me, I wanna do it again. I'm so excited and I like the experience that I wanna do it again. And so it's a great thing, and I encourage everyone who's thinking about it, who wants to run for office.
And I'll just add one point, which is I tend to be motivated by rage. If I get stuck in the New York City subway system one more time, I'll move home and do something. I don't know. I'll go crazy. I'll challenge anybody. Let's get those tracks fixed.
Is that we just wanted to end on a comment about the subway system?
It was on my mind.
Cool. Thank you everyone so much. We'll just ask Dr. Grant to end this. Thank you so much.
And how about Elizabeth Warren and Stephanie Cutter? I'm Mary Grant. I'm the president of the Institute. I thank you all for being here. Thanks, guys, for injecting intelligence, humor, and a little math into today's discussion. These are the things that give us hope, because we can all go out and make a difference, and we can choose to watch Pod Save, listen to Pod Save over Ballers. I think there's some clear choices there, for both, right? This is about coming together, so we can do both. But thank you. Please come back. The Kennedy Institute brings together interesting conversations. We bring together all kinds of folks to think about the issues that are happening today in the classroom, across our communities, and across the country. And we're so glad that you're here. Representative, thank you for being here with us. Councilor George, thank you for being with us. To all of our community partners, we thank you. Have a wonderful Memorial Day. Remember to take time to think about those who have sacrificed and lost their lives, because that's part of our democracy too. So thank you for coming. Take out a membership and come back. And thank you again, Pod Save America.